The cold wind of the frontier world cut through the armored convoy like knives. Dust rose in thick clouds as the sand-colored landscape stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged rock formations that looked like teeth of some sleeping beast. The Empress sat in the center of the royal transport, her eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of anxiety and calculation. Her guards, elite warriors of her own species, moved around her, their armor clanking as they secured the perimeter. They were proud, disciplined, and utterly confident in their ability to protect her. Yet the Empress felt a deep unease, one she could not shake despite all the reassurances and ceremonial gestures of loyalty. Something in the air made her claws twitch and her skin crawl, the instinctive sense of danger humans often spoke of but she had always dismissed. The convoy had been ambushed before, but never like this. Scouts had reported nothing unusual, and the Empress had traveled many times across such hostile worlds without incident. Still, there was something wrong. A tension lingered, invisible yet suffocating. Then the first blast hit. The ground beneath the transport shook violently, and a column of fire rose into the sky, scorching the rocky terrain. Guards shouted and scrambled, but their movements were chaotic, panicked. The Empress's heart thumped as she gripped the armrest, her mind racing to comprehend the situation. Her instinct screamed at her to flee, yet the training drilled into her for decades reminded her that she could not leave the transport unprotected, even for a moment. The attack came in waves. Shadows moved swiftly across the barren landscape, creatures with sleek, black exoskeletons, armed with plasma weapons that carved through the convoy's armor like paper. The royal guards formed defensive lines, but fear overtook discipline. One by one, they began retreating toward the edge of the canyon, shouting orders that made little sense. The Empress's stomach tightened with betrayal as she realized what was happening. Her own guards were abandoning her. Years of loyalty, of promises, of oaths to protect her life, even at the cost of their own, crumbled in an instant. She had been left behind, a jewel without its crown. In the chaos, a single figure remained. He was small, unassuming, and human, a soldier who had been assigned to auxiliary duty, considered expendable by the alien court. His armor was dented and scratched, and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. He moved with purpose, checking barricades, scanning the horizon, and preparing defenses. He did not hesitate, did not panic, and did not speak unless necessary. He simply acted. The Empress stared at him, astonished. She had been trained to fear humans, to dismiss them as fragile and unpredictable. Yet here was a single human standing calm in the storm, refusing to abandon her, unlike the multitude of warriors sworn to her life. Why are you staying?" she asked, her voice trembling but edged with curiosity. The human turned, meeting her gaze. His eyes were steady, unflinching. "I protect those I am assigned to," he said simply. "That is my duty." Instead, he observed, calculated, and adjusted their position. He took the Empress behind a natural ridge, using the jagged rocks as cover, and set small traps that could trip the attackers or redirect their fire. She watched, amazed, as he moved with quiet confidence, turning their vulnerable position into a makeshift fortress. The Empress realized that this human did not rely on strength alone. He relied on thought, on strategy, on understanding the battlefield, and he did it all without hesitation, without fear overwhelming him. Hours passed in a blur of attacks and defense. The Empress had seen many battles, had been present in dozens of wars and skirmishes, but nothing like this. The human's approach was different, focused, precise, relentless. She could see it clearly now. Humans did not fight for glory or ceremony. They fought for what mattered, and once they chose someone or something to protect, nothing could sway them from that purpose. She felt admiration growing in her chest, but also confusion. Why had she never understood humans before? Why had her people feared them? The enemy seemed to anticipate her fear, striking again and again, but the human soldier adapted faster than they could attack. He moved silently, using small technological devices to create false noises and shadows, tricking the attackers into revealing themselves or running into ambushes. At one point, he set a trap using a broken energy conduit, and when a group of enemies advanced carelessly, a burst of fire erupted from the sand, sending them retreating with screams of alarm. The Empress watched, unable to hide her amazement. One human alone was holding back what had seemed like an unstoppable force. Night fell, and with it came a brief lull in the attacks. The Empress and the human crouched behind a rock formation, both exhausted but alert. She noticed the small details of his actions, the way he tended to his wounds without complaint, The way he checked her breathing and made sure she was shielded from the wind. The way he spoke softly but firmly, instilling calm without speaking of danger in exaggerated terms. "You are remarkable," she said, finding her voice. "I do what must be done," he replied simply. There was no arrogance, no self-congratulation, only truth. The Empress realized that her entire understanding of the galaxy was flawed. Her people believed that strength lay in numbers, in titles, in fear of punishment. Yet here was a single human, weaker in every measurable way, achieving what hundreds of elite soldiers could not. It was not physical power that made him formidable. It was something deeper, something her species had long forgotten: resolve, courage, and unwavering loyalty. Another wave of enemies approached, larger than before. The Empress feared for the human, but he did not flinch. He set a series of traps, positioned the Empress strategically, and then faced the oncoming assault with a calm she could barely comprehend. The battle was chaotic, filled with fire, smoke, and screams. Yet through it all, the human soldier remained a constant, a rock in a storm of chaos. By dawn, the battlefield was silent. The enemy had retreated, wary of the human's tactics and unpredictability. The Empress stepped out from behind the rocks, surveying the aftermath. The human was battered and bloodied, but still standing. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and respect. She understood, finally, why humans were feared across the stars. Not for their strength alone, but for their refusal to give up, their ability to protect, and their persistence against impossible odds. "You saved me," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I was assigned to," he replied. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She knew he meant far more than the formal sense of duty. He had chosen to stay, to fight, to protect, when everyone else had fled. For the first time, the Empress saw humans as her equals, not weak creatures of little importance. She realized that an empire could fall because it relied on fear and rank rather than the loyalty and spirit of those it entrusted. She understood that her people's arrogance had blinded them to what truly mattered: courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to others. As the sun rose over the jagged landscape, the Empress looked at the human soldier and felt a strange hope blooming in her chest. Perhaps, with humans like him, her empire could learn a new way to survive, a new way to honor life and loyalty. Perhaps in this galaxy filled with fear and betrayal, there was a path forward illuminated not by titles or armies, but by the quiet, relentless courage of a single human. She stood taller, her presence calm but commanding, and for the first time in her life she did not feel alone. The human soldier remained by her side, battered but unbowed, and she understood that she had witnessed something extraordinary. The galaxy might not yet know it, but humans had a place among the stars. A place built not on fear, not on numbers, not on ceremonies, but on the simple, profound truth that some beings would never abandon those they were sworn to protect. And in that moment, the Empress made a silent vow. She would remember this day. She would remember the courage of the human soldier. She would ensure that his actions and the lessons they carried would be known throughout the galaxy. For now, though, they had to survive. The frontier world was still dangerous, and she knew that more challenges awaited. But she also knew this: with humans by her side, even one human, there was hope. And hope was something she had almost forgotten she could feel. She glanced at the human who was already scanning the horizon again, anticipating the next threat. She did not speak. Words were not needed. They understood each other. One human, one Empress, left behind by everyone else, ready to face the galaxy together. And somewhere in the distance, the horizon burned with the promise of new battles, new victories, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit. The first light of dawn barely lit the jagged rocks, yet the frontier world already felt alive with danger. The Empress had learned a harsh lesson the night before. She could trust very few, and the humans were unlike any beings she had known. The human soldier beside her moved silently, adjusting small devices and scanning the horizon, checking every shadow and every movement in the sand. He did not speak unless necessary, but his calm confidence filled the space between them. She began to notice how he carried himself, not like a soldier afraid of death, but like a creature who accepted it as a possibility and refused to let it control him. She tried to keep pace as he moved through the rocky terrain. Every step was precise, deliberate, like the calculation of a mind trained to survive. She realized that in her culture, warriors were expected to fight boldly in formation, relying on the collective strength of the group, on rank, and on ceremony. But humans, she saw now, were different. One could stand against hundreds, not because of superior strength, but because of superior thinking, superior timing, and an unyielding determination. The Empress had expected the human to be weak, expendable, like the other auxiliaries she had once ignored. She had been wrong. His small frame belied the intensity of his actions, and his focus seemed almost supernatural in its clarity. She noticed the way he crouched low to examine the ground, adjusting a trap here, moving debris there, creating paths and blockades that seemed almost invisible until the enemy stumbled into them. Each movement was quiet, yet effective. He did not shout orders. He did not panic when rocks shifted or dust clouds obscured the battlefield. He simply acted. The Empress followed, absorbing everything he did. She realized that his mind worked in a way her own species had abandoned long ago. Humans measured threats not by appearances or numbers, but by patterns and possibilities. He did not look at the enemies as monsters to fear. He saw them as challenges to overcome. And he moved without hesitation, without letting fear paralyze him. The Empress tried to speak. "Why do you not fear them?" she asked, keeping her voice low, almost afraid to interrupt his concentration. He glanced at her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Fear does not help, it only slows you down. I focus on what I can do, not what I cannot." In her culture, fear was used as a tool, both to control and to motivate. Here was a creature who had neither weapon nor magic superior to theirs, yet he did not tremble. He did not retreat. He did not hesitate. Fear existed, perhaps, but it did not dominate him. Another wave of enemies approached. The Empress's stomach tightened as she saw the shapes moving against the horizon, black silhouettes armed with deadly weapons. She expected panic, chaos, and collapse, but the human soldier did none of these. He moved to the edge of the ridge, studying their approach, and then, without a word, set a series of traps that would delay them and redirect them into positions where they could be attacked efficiently. She watched as he worked. Every action was precise, every placement intentional. He did not rely on brute strength, and he did not call for reinforcements. There were none. Instead, he used his mind, his experience, and his understanding of cause and effect to turn the battlefield into a weapon. When the first enemy scouts arrived, he sprang the traps. Explosions erupted from the sand, sending dust and debris into the air. The attackers stumbled, tripped, and fell into ambush positions that had been prepared hours before. The Empress could not help but feel awe at the humans' ingenuity. One being against many had managed to turn the odds in their favor, not by sheer force, but by patience, intelligence, and courage. For hours, the battle continued. The Empress began to realize the full extent of the humans' discipline. He tended to his minor wounds without complaint, adjusted strategies on the fly, and never allowed despair to touch his mind. He spoke only to give instructions or warnings, never to boast, never to complain. His energy did not falter even when exhaustion should have made him slow. She had never seen such endurance. Her people believed that endurance meant following orders for centuries, training endlessly under strict rules. But this human's endurance was different. It came from choice, from determination, from the decision to protect someone else no matter the cost. At one point, the Empress noticed that he had positioned her behind a natural rock outcropping that would shield her from direct fire. He checked her positioning, adjusted her cover, and then returned to his own work. She realized that his attention to detail was unmatched. While the alien guards might have followed orders in similar situations, they would have overlooked small but critical details, assuming their numbers or strength were enough. Humans, she now understood, did not assume. They calculated, observed, and adapted. The Empress's admiration grew with each passing hour. She had long believed that humans were fragile, unpredictable, and easily broken. She had underestimated them because she had not known them, not truly. But here, in the harsh reality of survival, one human had shown her something her entire culture had forgotten. Loyalty was stronger than armor, courage stronger than strength, and intelligence could defeat brute force every time. The sun began to climb higher, and the heat of the day pressed down on the barren landscape. The Empress was tired, but she could not rest. The human soldier moved beside her, checking their traps, scanning the horizon, ready for the next wave. His wounds were visible now, a gash on his arm, a bruise forming on his shoulder, but he did not slow down. He continued to prepare, continue to protect, continue to fight. In a rare moment, he looked at her and spoke. "They will come again, we must be ready." "But why do you stay? Everyone else has abandoned me." The human soldier beside her had shown her that these things were meaningless without courage and honor. She had been abandoned by her people, left to die, yet here she was alive because one being, one human, had chosen to act. The next enemy wave approached, larger than the first, moving with coordination and aggression. The Empress watched as the human soldier moved into position, calling on every resource at his disposal, every trick and trap he had set. When the attackers reached the ambush, chaos erupted. Explosions, fire, and smoke filled the valley. The Empress could see the enemy's confusion and fear. They did not expect one small human to hold the line with such skill. She realized that this was the essence of humanity, a force that could not be measured by size or strength, but by resolve, creativity, and the willingness to protect others. The human soldier fought not for glory, not for rank, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he had changed her understanding of the universe forever. As the day wore on, the human's energy never faltered. The Empress had never seen such resilience. He moved like a constant presence, a living wall against chaos. Every attack was met with preparation, every threat countered with intelligence. She began to feel something she had not felt in years, confidence, not in her own abilities, but in the strength of the human beside her. When the sun finally began to set, the battlefield was littered with the remnants of the attackers' forces. The human soldier, bloodied but unbroken, surveyed the terrain with careful eyes. He had done what many thought impossible. One human alone had kept the Empress safe against overwhelming odds. The Empress looked at him, seeing the quiet determination etched into every line of his face. She understood now why humans were feared across the galaxy. They were not naturally stronger or faster than other species. They were terrifying because they chose to endure, to protect, to fight beyond reason, beyond expectation. They were unpredictable, relentless, and loyal beyond measure. I owe you my life," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. He shook his head. "You do not owe me. I did what had to be done." She had seen the heart of humanity, and it burned brighter than she had ever imagined. The night fell, and the frontier world grew quiet once more. The Empress sat beside the human soldier, watching the stars appear in the black sky above. She thought of her people, of the guards who had abandoned her, and of the lessons she had learned in a single day. One human had taught her more about loyalty, courage, and the value of life than she had learned in a lifetime of court politics and ceremonial duty. She knew that the future would be uncertain, that more dangers awaited, but she also knew that with humans like this one, there was hope. Not hope built on fear or titles or armies, but hope built on the quiet, steadfast courage of a being who refused to abandon those under their protection. And as the human soldier cleaned his weapon and checked their remaining traps, the Empress made a silent promise. She would remember this day. She would remember the human who had saved her life. And she would ensure that the lessons of loyalty, courage, and intelligence would shape the future of her empire. The galaxy might not yet understand humans, but she did. And that understanding, she realized, could change everything. The next morning, the horizon glimmered with the pale light of a sun that barely warmed the barren landscape. The Empress rose from the rough ground where she had spent the night, her body sore, her mind still buzzing from the previous day's chaos. The human soldier was already awake, moving efficiently among the traps and makeshift defenses they had prepared. His movements were calm, methodical, yet every step carried the quiet intensity of someone who had been forged in fire and danger. The Empress watched him in silence. She realized that her admiration for him had grown into something deeper, a respect that bordered on awe. He had saved her life not once, but countless times, without hesitation or complaint. He had faced enemies she had feared and turned what should have been certain death into a tactical advantage. And he had done it with nothing more than determination, skill, and an unshakable sense of duty. She could not imagine any of her royal guards performing in the same way. They would have panicked, argued, or abandoned her in the first moments of danger. "Do they always attack like this?" she asked quietly, keeping her voice low so as not to distract him. The human glanced at her, his face set and serious. "No, sometimes they are smarter, sometimes they come in larger groups, but they always underestimate one thing: humans who fight for someone else. I do not abandon what I am sworn to protect. It does not matter who you are or where you come from. I act because it is the right thing to do." Yet here was a human who acted purely out of choice, without concern for reward or recognition. She began to understand that the galaxy's fear of humans was not based on physical strength, but on the force of their character. Their quiet was broken by a distant rumble. The enemy forces were regrouping, larger and more coordinated than before. The Empress's chest tightened with anxiety, but the human did not flinch. He moved toward the edge of the ridge, scanning the horizon with keen eyes, calculating distances and possibilities. He adjusted their traps, repositioned debris, and instructed her on where to stay safe. She followed his directions, realizing that she was learning from him in ways she had never imagined. As the enemy approached, he turned briefly to her. "Stay low and do not move unless I tell you. Watch how I handle this." When the first wave of attackers reached their traps, chaos erupted. Explosions and smoke obscured vision, and the human was already moving among the enemy, using a combination of clever tactics and controlled force to drive them back. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. One human was outmaneuvering entire squads of trained alien warriors. Hours passed in this relentless battle. The Empress was amazed at the human's endurance. His movements never faltered, his attention never wavered, and his resolve never broke. She began to notice small things: how he tended to minor injuries without slowing down, how he anticipated the enemy's next move before they even made it, and how he communicated without words, guiding her through the chaos with subtle gestures. She had never experienced anything like this. Her people relied on protocol and strength, but the human relied on something far more powerful: intelligence, strategy, and unwavering determination. During a brief lull in the fighting, she spoke again. "How do you do it? How do you keep going when the odds are so against you?" "I do not fight for myself, I fight for others. That gives me strength. When someone depends on me, giving up is not an option." He was driven by purpose, not fear. He was motivated by loyalty, not convenience. And in that motivation, she recognized a force that could change the course of battles, even empires. The enemy regrouped again, more organized than ever. The human observed them carefully, analyzing their formation and movements. Without hesitation, he adjusted their position, set new traps, and moved her to a safer vantage point. Then he attacked. She watched as he struck with precision, striking at weak points, using misdirection to confuse and divide the enemy. The battlefield became a dance of chaos, with the human at the center, orchestrating every movement. The Empress felt her pulse quicken, both in fear and in awe. She had believed humans to be fragile and limited, yet here was one human doing what hundreds of her species could not. She began to see the truth clearly. Humans were dangerous not because of raw power, but because of their unpredictability, intelligence, and resolve. One human could change the tide of battle simply by refusing to give up. As the sun climbed higher, the fighting intensified. The human was hit by a glancing blow, staggering slightly, but he did not falter. He continued to fight, adapting to every new challenge, using both cunning and courage to protect the Empress. She realized that his loyalty was not blind obedience. It was a conscious choice, a decision to act when others would flee. And that choice, she understood, made humans unstoppable in ways her people could never predict. At one point, she found herself moving closer to him, instinctively drawn by his presence and his calm authority. "You are remarkable," she said softly. He shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "I do not think of it that way. I do what must be done, that is all." In that moment, she realized that this human had shown her the true power of loyalty, courage, and determination. The day wore on, and the enemy began to retreat, realizing that they had underestimated their opponent. One human, armed with nothing but skill, intelligence, and resolve, had held them off repeatedly, turning what should have been certain death into victory after victory. The Empress felt a surge of gratitude, admiration, and hope. She had been abandoned by her own guards, left to die, and yet she had survived because one human had chosen to act when others would not. As night approached, the battlefield grew quiet once more. The Empress sat beside the human soldier, watching him check traps and assess the terrain. She realized that the galaxy might fear humans for their unpredictability and persistence, but she understood the deeper truth. Humans were remarkable because they acted with purpose, courage, and loyalty. They were capable of feats that no other species could match, not because of strength, but because of the strength of their spirit. "I owe you my life," she said again, her voice quieter this time, filled with sincerity. He shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I did what had to be done." One human, small and seemingly fragile, could achieve what entire armies could not, simply because he refused to abandon those under his protection. The stars began to appear in the sky, distant and cold, yet somehow comforting in their steady presence. The Empress realized that the human soldier had taught her a lesson more valuable than any she had learned in the palaces of her empire. Courage and loyalty were stronger than fear. Intelligence could outmatch strength, and one being with determination could change the course of events in ways no force could predict. She looked at him, and felt a sense of hope she had never known before. The human beside her, battered but unbroken, had shown her that the galaxy was not ruled by fear or power alone. There were forces beyond strength, forces that could shape destiny, protect the vulnerable, and challenge the mightiest armies. And those forces, she now understood, were embodied in the human spirit. As the night deepened, the Empress made a silent vow. She would remember this day. She would remember the courage, the intelligence, and the loyalty of the human soldier who had saved her life. And she would carry this lesson with her, shaping her decisions, her leadership, and the way she saw the galaxy. Humans were not fragile. They were not weak. They were relentless, loyal, and capable of unimaginable courage. And in that moment, she knew the future would never be the same. With humans like this one, she had seen the possibility of change, not just for herself, but for her empire, for the galaxy, and for the countless lives that would follow. The human soldier, unaware of the profound impact he had made, continued his work. His movements were efficient, deliberate, and tireless. He had no need for recognition, no desire for reward. He acted because it was right. And that simple truth, she realized, was more powerful than any army, more enduring than any empire, and more valuable than any title or rank. For the first time, the Empress felt a deep, unshakable trust, not in her guards, not in her titles, but in the human beside her. One being, small, underestimated, yet unstoppable, had shown her a truth she could never forget. Loyalty, courage, and intelligence could change the world. And as she watched him prepare for the next wave of challenges, she knew that together they could face anything. The frontier world was dangerous, the galaxy uncertain, and threats countless. But with humans like him, she felt a strength she had never known. A human's resolve, she realized, could illuminate the darkest corners of the universe, turning despair into hope, weakness into power, and fear into triumph. The morning sun barely lit the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape of the frontier world. The Empress stirred, her body aching from the previous day's relentless battles, but her mind was sharp and alert. She had seen the limits of her royal guards, and she had seen the power of one human soldier. That lesson had changed everything. She rose carefully, observing the terrain around them. The human soldier was already moving, adjusting traps and scanning the horizon, his small frame efficient and precise despite the injuries he bore. Their quiet routine was broken by a distant hum, low and mechanical. Dust rose on the horizon, forming a haze that blurred shapes and movement. The Empress squinted, her heart tightening. More forces were approaching, but these were not enemies, they were her own people. The royal guards she had once trusted were returning, mounted on hovercrafts, armored and armed, expecting to reclaim their Empress and perhaps, in their minds, to save face after their cowardice. The Empress felt a surge of anger, tempered by the clear memory of the human soldier's actions. She had survived not because of her royal guards, but because of him. She watched the hovercrafts descend and the guards dismount, their expressions a mixture of fear, relief, and embarrassment. They expected gratitude, a warm welcome, perhaps even medals for rescuing her. Instead, they were met with silence. The human soldier moved slightly in front of her, as if shielding her from the returning guards. They hesitated, uncertain at the sight of him. One of them stepped forward, a tall warrior with polished armor reflecting the harsh sunlight. "Your Highness," he began, voice formal and slightly nervous, "we have returned to escort you back to safety. You left me here to die while you fled. You survived," the leader of the guards continued cautiously, "thanks to some luck and—" He did not move to bow, did not offer any words of boast or apology. He simply stood, calm and resolute, radiating a quiet strength that none of the alien warriors could match. The Empress stepped closer to him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "This is the one who protected me when you all failed. This is the one I trust." "Not you. Forgiveness." The guards, despite their training and numbers, could not match what one human had accomplished alone. The Empress's eyes scanned each guard in turn. "You returned, but your actions no longer matter. I am leaving this place with him. If you wish to come along, know that your protection is no longer needed. You will follow orders, not because of fear or rank, but because I permit it." The battlefield had taught her that loyalty and courage mattered more than numbers or titles, and the human soldier beside her embodied that truth perfectly. The human soldier finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "If they choose to follow, I will guide them. If not, they will need to keep up." She knew he would not allow hesitation or weakness to compromise their journey. Together, they began moving across the jagged terrain, the returning guards falling behind, uncertain and wary of the humans' authority. The Empress felt a sense of clarity she had never known. Her empire had relied on tradition, titles, and fear. She now understood that these meant nothing without courage, intelligence, and loyalty. As they progressed, the Empress observed how the human soldier interacted with the returning guards. He did not berate them, nor did he mock them. He simply demonstrated competence and calm, guiding them where necessary, keeping the group moving efficiently. Slowly, the guards began to realize that their usual tactics, arrogance, and reliance on numbers were insufficient. One human had outperformed them all, and they were beginning to understand why. The Empress felt a quiet satisfaction in watching this unfold. She had always known humans were underestimated, but now she understood the depth of that error. Humans were not weaker. They were not fragile. They were relentless, intelligent, and loyal in ways that could defy expectation. And when the Empress saw the guards' shame and hesitation, she realized that her people had much to learn. Hours passed, and the terrain grew rougher. Rocks jutted from the ground like jagged teeth, and the horizon was dotted with potential threats. The human soldier moved ahead, scouting and adjusting traps, ensuring the group's safety. The Empress followed, her trust in him absolute. She knew that whatever lay ahead, they could survive, not because of the returning guards, but because of him. The guards began to speak among themselves, their voices low, filled with unease and reflection. "I never thought one human could do this," muttered one, his gaze fixed on the soldier. "They are different," another admitted, his voice reluctant. "Stronger in ways we do not understand. Fragile yet enduring. Weak, yet capable of changing the fate of empires with courage, intelligence, and loyalty." As night fell, the group set up a temporary camp. The Empress observed the human soldier moving among the guards, checking their equipment, reinforcing their defenses, and quietly ensuring that everyone understood their role. He did not boast, he did not demand respect, and he did not act out of fear. He acted because it was necessary, because it was right, and because he would not abandon those in his care. The Empress realized that this was the essence of humanity. Their strength did not lie in physical power, wealth, or titles. It lay in their choices, their loyalty, and their determination. One human acting with purpose could achieve what entire armies could not. She had seen it with her own eyes. She had felt it in her own survival. She approached the human soldier as he adjusted a trap. "You have taught me much," she said quietly. He glanced at her, nodding slightly. "I have only done what I must. You learn from observation and experience. But you have shown me what courage and loyalty truly mean. I will not forget it." The night passed with the group remaining vigilant, guided by the human soldier's knowledge and foresight. The Empress felt a sense of security she had never known, not because of her status or power, but because of the being beside her. She realized that empires could survive and thrive not because of armies or politics, but because of creatures capable of loyalty, intelligence, and courage beyond measure. By dawn, the horizon was quiet. The returning guards had begun to understand the human soldier's methods, his strategies, and his unwavering determination. Slowly, they were learning to respect him, not because he commanded them, but because his actions had proven his worth beyond doubt. The Empress smiled faintly, knowing that this lesson would echo far beyond this frontier world. And she knew that the journey was far from over. The frontier world still held dangers, and the galaxy beyond was full of uncertainty. But with humans like this one, she felt hope. Not hope based on fear or power, but hope built on courage, intelligence, and loyalty, the very traits that could change the course of battles, empires, and perhaps even the future of the galaxy. Together, the Empress and the human soldier, along with the returning guards who were slowly learning their place, continued across the harsh terrain. Every step was a lesson, every action a demonstration of what it meant to protect, endure, and lead. And in the Empress's heart, a new understanding had taken root. Humans were not to be underestimated. They were not weak. They were extraordinary. And one day, she knew, the galaxy would learn this truth as well. The frontier world's horizon burned orange as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. The Empress walked steadily beside the human soldier, her eyes scanning the distance, her mind replaying the events of the past days. She had survived attacks, betrayal, and the harshness of a hostile world. She had been abandoned by her own guards and saved by one human. That human, small and unassuming, had shown her courage and loyalty beyond anything she had known in her empire. The returning royal guards moved behind them, their steps careful and hesitant. Their expressions betrayed a mix of awe, shame, and grudging respect. They had seen one human fight, endure, and outsmart their forces repeatedly. They had seen him act without fear, without complaint, and without thought of reward. They had seen what it truly meant to protect someone. Some of them spoke in low voices, reflecting on what they had witnessed. "I never thought it possible," muttered one. One human against hundreds, and still he stood. She had learned more from observing him than from a lifetime of court instruction or military strategy. His loyalty was unwavering. His courage was constant. His mind was sharp and adaptable. As they approached a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon, the Empress felt tension in the air. The human soldier crouched low, scanning the rocks below. His body was still worn from battle, but his eyes were alert, his mind calculating. "Something moves down there," he said quietly, almost to himself. The Empress nodded, understanding that his senses were sharper than any device or weapon. Humans, she realized, did not rely on brute force. They relied on observation, reasoning, and instinct sharpened by experience. From the shadows of the canyon emerged a group of hostile figures, faster and more organized than the attackers before. They had regrouped, more determined than ever. But the Empress was no longer afraid. She had the human soldier beside her, and he had taught her how fear could be overcome by preparation, intelligence, and courage. She watched as he analyzed the new threat, repositioning traps and guiding the returning guards to cover. "Stay behind me," he instructed calmly. "Follow my lead and do exactly as I say." Explosions erupted as they hit traps, forcing them into narrow choke points where the terrain and the humans' planning gave them no advantage. The Empress watched, fascinated, as he used misdirection and strategy to control the flow of the battle. He did not strike recklessly. He struck with precision, conserving energy and ensuring that every move counted. The Empress felt a sense of pride and awe. This human, so small and unassuming in her eyes before, had become the axis on which their survival turned. The returning guards began to follow his lead more carefully, realizing that their past arrogance and fear had been replaced by respect for a creature they had underestimated. They moved cautiously, their trust shifting toward someone they had once thought inferior. Hours passed in a tense series of attacks and retreats. The enemy was relentless, but the human soldier's strategy and loyalty were unmatched. The Empress saw him act not for glory, not for orders, but because he believed it was right. He had chosen to stand when others would flee. He had chosen to protect when others would abandon. And in that choice, he had revealed a truth the galaxy often forgot. Humans could change the course of events, not by strength alone, but by their unbreakable resolve. At one point, the enemy made a final desperate charge, attempting to overwhelm their position. The Empress's heart pounded, but the human soldier did not falter. He directed the guards, adjusted traps, and positioned himself where he could strike with the most effect. His movements were fluid, almost effortless despite exhaustion and injuries. When the enemy hit the first line, they were caught in a maze of obstacles, forced into positions where every move could be countered. The Empress watched in amazement as the human soldier turned chaos into advantage. He fought with intelligence, adaptability, and unyielding determination. Even when struck, he did not falter. Even when faced with impossible odds, he did not hesitate. The enemy, confused and demoralized, began to retreat, realizing that one human had outmatched their entire effort. Silence fell over the battlefield once more. The Empress approached the human soldier who was breathing heavily, blood streaked across his armor, his body showing every mark of a hard-fought battle. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "You have done what no army could," she said softly. "You have protected me, and you have shown me the true strength of your kind." The Empress felt a swell of emotion she could not name. She realized that her empire, her titles, and her authority meant nothing compared to the courage and loyalty of this human. He had shown her the value of perseverance, intelligence, and selfless action. She had survived because of him, and she would never forget it. The returning guards moved forward cautiously, their expressions a mixture of shame and awe. The Empress turned to them, her voice firm and commanding. "You abandoned your duty once. You were lucky to return. Learn from this day. Observe. Respect. And remember that strength is not measured by numbers or armor, but by courage, loyalty, and intelligence." The Empress and the human soldier began their journey back to the nearest safe outpost. The terrain was harsh, and the journey long, but the Empress felt confidence she had never known. She had learned the power of choice, the meaning of loyalty, and the impact one individual could make. The human soldier moved with steady determination, guiding the group, checking for danger and maintaining focus despite exhaustion. As night fell, the Empress looked up at the stars. They stretched endlessly above, cold and distant, yet somehow comforting. She reflected on the events of the past days. She had been abandoned by her own species, betrayed by those who swore to protect her. And yet she had survived. Not because of armies, not because of titles, not because of fear or ritual, but because one human had acted with courage, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. The human soldier sat beside her, tending to minor injuries and reinforcing their makeshift camp. She watched him quietly, realizing that this creature had taught her more than any tutor, general, or royal advisor ever could. He had shown her the true meaning of strength, of survival, and of what it meant to fight for something beyond oneself. "Humans are remarkable," she said softly, almost to herself. The human glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "They are," he replied simply. "We do what we must." That understanding, she knew, was more powerful than any weapon, more lasting than any empire, and more profound than any title. The journey continued over the next days. The frontier world was full of dangers, but the human soldier's guidance kept them safe. The returning guards slowly adopted his methods, learning the value of observation, strategy, and discipline. The Empress watched with quiet satisfaction. She had seen a new way of leadership, a new path to strength that did not rely on fear, intimidation, or ritual. She had seen what humans could teach her empire about courage, loyalty, and intelligence. By the time they reached the outpost, word had already spread of what had occurred. Other humans, and even some alien observers, began to recognize the actions of a single human soldier who had defended an empress against overwhelming odds. The reputation of humanity in the galaxy began to shift. They were no longer dismissed as weak or expendable. They were respected, feared, and admired for their loyalty, courage, and ingenuity. The Empress stood tall as she addressed the guards and onlookers. "Today, I have learned the meaning of loyalty and courage. I have witnessed the power of intelligence and perseverance. One human has saved my life, guided us through danger, and proven that strength is more than armor and numbers. Remember this day. Learn from it. Honor it. And do not underestimate what a single being can accomplish when they choose to act for what is right." As the Empress prepared to return to her empire, she knew that her understanding of leadership, loyalty, and courage had transformed. She would rebuild her guard, incorporate lessons learned from humanity, and ensure that those who served her understood the value of duty and choice. And she would never forget the human soldier who had shown her the way. The frontier world receded behind them, but the lessons of survival, loyalty, and courage remained. The human soldier had proven that one being, acting with intelligence, determination, and loyalty, could accomplish what entire armies could not. And in that truth, the galaxy would come to respect humanity, not for strength alone, but for the spirit that refused to abandon what it was sworn to protect. The stars above seemed brighter that night, reflecting the quiet triumph of a human soldier who had changed the life of an empress, altered the perception of an empire, and reminded the galaxy of the power of courage, loyalty, and intelligence. The Empress walked beside him, her heart steady, her mind clear, and her spirit renewed. Together they had survived, and together they would shape a future defined not by fear or titles, but by the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit. And as they disappeared into the horizon, the galaxy began to understand a truth that would never be forgotten. Humans do not abandon those they protect, and in that truth there is power beyond measure.